I'd like to welcome everyone to the webinar. My name's Craig Elford from Uniware. I know that you all are busy and I do appreciate you taking the time to attend this webinar. And I do hope you gain an insight as to what you can achieve with your multi-value database. Uniware is an established multi-value service and database provider and have been for well over 30 years. During the webinar, if you do have any questions, please use the chat box as indicated on the slide in front of you, and we will get back to you via email at the completion of the webinar. I'll give you a bit of background about Uniware. As I said, my name is Craig Elford and I am the General Manager of Uniware. We've been a long-time supporter and supplier of the multi-value industry, as I said, for well over 30 years. We are located in Melbourne and we do have offices over in Perth and Sydney, as well as in China. We did start way back in 1979 as Pick Solutions, and we made our name with our Distrib ERP application software, which we have upgraded numerous times to now be our Ausvantage ERP application, which is able to be run on all multi-value flavours. During the early years, we were predominantly a multi-value technology and service provider. We provided a lot of services to various industries and various organisations, helping them streamline their processes as well as provide development services. And this has ranged from banking institutions to lending organisations and distribution companies. So we do have a very rich history in providing IT and development services to the multi-value community in general. In 1998, we acquired a regional ISP in Victoria, which we took to a national audience, providing web hosting solutions and general internet access as a retail provider. We also started our Exceed web development studio, where their task was developing functional rich websites for all our customers, Uniware customers, as well as prospective web development customers. And Exceed provided the services where we developed our Clear Connect application, which is an API-driven e-commerce solution which connected up to all the multi-value databases, and we use their services in helping provide that solution. We have been a long-standing and successful partner with Rocket Software. We have been a reseller of their products, D3, UniData and Universe, since they became available, since the early 90s. And we continue to provide these products right now, and we hopefully will be doing so well into the future. Last year, we entered into a relationship with Zumasys over in the United States and became resellers or distributors for their jBASE and OpenQM products. We saw this as an opportunity for Uniware, as well as the multi-value marketplace within Australia, to provide customers and users of multi-value with more options. Currently, there is a significant portion of the multi-value industry linked to one vendor, and we saw it a distinct advantage in providing options to the multi-value industry that haven't previously been available. So now Uniware have the largest multi-value database offering within Australia with the Rocket products and the Zumasys products. Another reason for moving ahead with Zumasys was to create excitement and some enthusiasm within the multi-value industry, and we hope to achieve that in part with our webinar series, which you're taking part in today, and we'll have some follow-up webinars over the coming weeks. The slide in front of you shows a little bit about Uniware, just a list of our employees. We have a dedicated and very diligent bunch of employees who are eager to provide solutions to all our customers. We have more than 15 multi-value developers, as I said, through Melbourne, over in Perth as well as in Sydney. We also have numerous staff that are experts in the open source fields, such as your PHPs, your Perls, Python and Ruby and so on. These staff are also spread between Melbourne, Perth and Sydney, as well as our office over in China. We do also provide development and support contractual services to the multi-value industry in general, where some organisations struggle to find employees. We can fill the gap for them in the interim, as well as just providing services when people go on annual leave and so on. Our aim is to provide as much support as we possibly can to the multi-value industry. And that involves integrated API solutions, application modernisation, as well as providing 24-hour support for database support. And our staff, our multi-value staff, do provide more than 150 years combined experience within their field. Over the last 3 or 4 years, the multi-value industry has had a considerable consolidation. Rocket Software acquired the TigerLogic D3 database a number of years ago, and now have the D3 UniData and Universe databases within their organisation. And that's why we thought it was important to partner up with Zumasys and promote and distribute their products within Australia, because it does provide more options to current customers of multi-value, as well as prospects on what functionality is available on each one of the databases and where it best suits your organisation. This slide is really talks about our multi-value applications in general. I think we all agree on 3 things that'll become evident to you. That all our applications running on multi-value are typically the mission-critical applications within your organisation. They've potentially been developed for decades and contain an enormous amount of intellectual property that you have developed to suit your organisation, ensuring that it runs smoothly and you're able to extract and gather the data you need. This is all great, but the problem we all experience is when we get new employees or new developers or new managers within the organisation, they look at the application and they believe it to be dated. And that is a misconception from the fact that our applications are feature-rich and they perform everything we want to perform very efficiently. However, their appearance, as per the bottom slide here, can give the appearance that it is an old legacy type system with a green screen, text-based environment. So our challenge as service providers and developers is to transform those green screens into the graphical type display you see above that. Historically, this has been quite challenging, especially placing it inside a browser. But with the development of browser technologies and the layered products that I mentioned earlier with the Pythons and so on, getting to this stage is a far easier process, and the solutions are far more robust and stable than they were historically. The other challenge we all face is finding new employees. Currently, with the multi-value industry being quite an old industry and a very well-established technology, a lot of developers are aging. They're either retiring, moving on to different challenges or different businesses, and replacing these people can be extremely difficult. That's where the open source industry becomes an advantage, as you'll see later on in this presentation with Patrick. Modernisation can happen outside the multi-value database itself, while you still can take advantage of all that IP that you have generated. So you can keep all your business logic rules within your multi-value application and use other technologies as a display mechanism. Therefore, it does broaden your opportunities for employment. You'll still need people to understand what MultiValue is from a programming language, but once you get these new employees, educating them in MultiValue can be achieved. Just before I do hand over to Patrick, I'll just give you a bit of a rundown of where both Uniware and Zumasys see MultiValue heading into the future. Currently, MultiValue is very strong. There are a lot of very large companies and organisations using MultiValue on a daily basis when you do any banking, online banking or through an ATM device. There's every likelihood that transaction will touch a MultiValue database at some point of time. So we don't believe it's a dying industry. What we do believe is customers running MultiValue need to be made aware or more aware of what functionality and development environments are available to them to bring their MultiValue application into a more modern interface. These solutions are much easier to achieve now than they ever have been before. And when Patrick goes through his slides, he will make it quite clear that there are many options available to all of us. It's just a matter of following what best suits our requirements. Just a little bit about Patrick before I hand over. He was a member of a very large D3 organisation over in America. One of his tasks was to provide a modern interface for their users. And originally that was a .NET application, which Patrick then migrated or upgraded that to an Angular front end where many thousands of users access their D3 MultiValue database through those interfaces. So Patrick has significant experience with what we're talking about with modernisation. So it is my pleasure to now hand you over to Patrick to take care of the next 20 or 30 minutes where he does walk through the options available to you presently. Thanks, Patrick.
I got probably 20 plus years of experience, probably being in very similar shoes as the rest of you, which is maintaining a large PIC-based multi-value application. And in my space, I had to do a lot of integration work. And I like to tell people I was pretty young when I got started, and I didn't know what I was not supposed to do. So I was very creative on getting the D3 system in those years to call and talk to stuff. So I'm now here with Zumasys, and I'm going around and both showing the technology and helping build new tools for the platforms to help us all move into the new world. So like the first hit is quite often what we're all experiencing, which is the organizational concerns, which is what is this PIC thing? It's hard to integrate. Nobody seems to know what it is. It seems difficult to manage by your classic sysadmins. It looks old because everybody sees these green screen or blue screen applications and think of being a DOS application. And with that, you end up with a lack or decline of resources. You usually have some senior developers, usually one or two, who've done all the work on the platform over the years. And so you find both your customers and your business associates kind of stuck in the middle. And really the big problem, and really what people keep pointing to is, well, it's not SQL. And PIC is not a SQL system. It's a very different type of animal. So over the years, when I was attempting to tackle this problem, I would go off and look at any of the new technologies and find what things were out there that we could utilize. And I've done probably what a lot of you have done, which is attempt to work through SQL or through ODBC interfaces, but it was never easy to use and was usually pretty non-performant. So what I like to do is let's first talk about really what we've been dealing with as a development environment, and what any developer that you were bringing in newer in the last, let's say, 15 years, what they were used to, which is this nice Microsoft Visual Studio based environment, and it's a very nice environment, and it's very tightly intertwined with the tools that they offer. And so you got your Visual Studio with their programming languages, which could be something like C# or Java, very object based, but it's tied very tightly to a SQL based system. And so all the tools in there, when it came from tying the UI to a database, was always expecting a SQL piece, and it was very tightly coupled. And we would come in as PIC developers and start trying to tie our applications into this layer, and normally we would tie in at two places. We'd either attempt to make PIC look like a SQL system through ODBC, or we would tie in with extension languages that the vendors would offer. And if any of you have attempted to do this, you'll understand these items, which is, if you go to the ODBC route, you find that PIC doesn't map very well. It's a very difficult thing to do. And why? Because PIC has features that SQL doesn't have. And some of those items are nested records. You know, we're able to store much more complex record structures in one record. PIC does not have an enforced schema, and of course SQL does. PIC can actually store different type of schemas in the same file. PIC doesn't enforce any data types. That's with your schema. And I always like to say the classic, if you ever export data out to somebody out of a PIC system and they expect a field, for example, to be a number, a money amount, we could actually throw data in there, an alpha in there. And it's always a question, how do you guys do that? The real big issue you run into if you go ODBC is none of the optimizations or the way that those type of developers would think actually work well with PIC. So even if we do get it mapped, it doesn't perform the same, because you're actually taking a certain type of PIC structure, breaking it into this complex SQL structure, and then it's coming back together on the UA side. And so they usually just don't perform well. And the big item is you're bypassing the real power of the PIC platform, which is usually our business logic. All the rules and code that was put into the system, that's all been bypassed when you just go straight through ODBC. So usually the better option was to go with direct integration. And that's where you actually extend the PIC language over into the programming language that they're using on their side, for example, .NET or Java. And products that do that, you'll see on the U2 side, you have UniObjects. Over on jBASE, we have our JAgent. D3 has its MVS toolkit. Bluefinity has its MV.NET product, which is a cross-platform one. And while these are great products, there's some big problems. And the first and foremost is that your UI developer still has to learn PIC, because you're really just bringing the PIC programming commands into .NET. So they're still forced to learn what arrays are and how our lookups and all that stuff works. Two is you're kind of tied to only the technologies that your vendor has exposed that to. And so it's usually just .NET and Java. A couple of the vendors have done a little bit to Python, but you know, every 2 to 3 years there's a new tool in this space. And right now Node is a big popular tool. Ruby is very popular. So unless your PIC multi-shop, your vendor ports something like UniObjects out to these, you're unable to use that technology. A real big problem is that your PIC developers, your senior PIC developers, are then usually unable to contribute, because many of these other environments, like a .NET environment, which are very class and object-driven environments, there's a steep learning curve, and most of your senior PIC developers are going to shy away from that. They usually just want their AccuTerm window and their editor, and they want to code. So they find themselves unable to contribute. And on the .NET side, the current developer is still wondering, what is this? Why am I having to learn this other model? I have SQL tools. Why can I not just use my SQL tools? So as I've been trying to tackle this problem, I would really look into the new markets and see where the new technology is going. And this is where I get real excited about what's happened last 4 to 5 years. And it's through the open source movement, and it's through the very large social technology companies such as Facebook, Google, and Twitter. And they were all handed an interesting problem where they had to build these applications, which are database applications, that would be worldwide. I mean, we're talking millions of users. And as they would try to scale up the technology they had available to them, which would be your Microsoft or Oracle or Sun type tools, they ran a couple problems. One, they were too expensive. Two, they wouldn't scale, and they were slow. So they actually used their resources and started using open source and tried to tackle the problem and find a better way to do this. And a couple really interesting things came out that really helps us. And the first one was the NoSQL movement. They actually went back and looked and said SQL is actually operating too slow for us. They reviewed what they were attempting to do, and they said, well, why don't we store data in a different way? And so this came out with a NoSQL movement. And this is where you'll hear popular ones like Mongo or HBase or Cassandra come out. And then, as Paul was saying, they beefed up the power in the browser to bring a very rich application. And as I talk about this, I think an important thing to throw out is, you know, when I talk about where SQL is and where REST and these terms I'm going to throw out, this is at the place where they ran into a real fundamental change, which is once the browser was going to become more powerful and all it had to go do is retrieve data or call a function, they had to build a way to make those systems share versus just bringing perhaps SQL out and letting the browser directly access your SQL system, which they were never going to do. So this is where these new movements came in. And what really excited me about this is that they're all open. They're all designed to allow different systems to communicate back and forth. These are open standards. Nothing's proprietary. Most of these companies are using open source stuff and freely give out the tools they're doing this all with. So the community then continues to build the tools out. So the big thing here is, how does this end up helping us? And let's look at the technology pieces that are involved with this. And the big one is what's called REST. And that's why everybody is probably here as we talk about what is REST. And what REST is a way for different systems to share basically what I would call subroutines in our world, but it's basically allowing us to share our business logic and our data between different dissimilar systems, all using open standards. And so what you do is you look at REST, and it's a couple things. First, it's a way to exchange data back and forth. And if you look at any modern developers, they are developing in their languages such as C# or Java or PHP. They have an object concept, which is a data object. And I have an example up here for you to look on the left. And if you look at it, it's their ability to store a complex business document in a single variable or document or object, as it's called here. And if you look down, you'll see some things that should look familiar to us as pick guys, which you're going to notice that you have nested arrays in there, where I can say, hey, I can store multiple phone numbers. This thing can store a very complex invoice because it's got arrays and then variable types within arrays. So again, this is able to describe any type of pick record. Two, you'll notice there's no typing, meaning I didn't have to say that this was an integer or this was a number. Again, another similarity to pick. Three, the wonderful thing here is you can now take this one customer variable and pass it around to different functions. And then finally, they're able to extend it or modify it, add new fields to it on the fly without having to rebuild everything. So that's the core piece, is that this technology is saying we're going to exchange our data with objects. Now, what JSON is, if you look in the middle, is a way, it's basically an EDI format that allows any system to represent their object as an EDI record for passing back and forth between systems. Therefore, if I'm over here on the left programming in JavaScript, making my object, when I make a call to my back-end system, which could be in PHP, it could be in C#, it could be even in PIC Basic, to send that object over to them, I first turn it into this JSON object, which is an EDI file format. We send it. The other system is then able to take that JSON and convert it into its object structure, if it offers objects, and move forward. So that's the first important piece, and really the foundation of what this is. And what's great for us is that the more complex object structure can describe PIC data. The second piece they add to their object programming is the concept of methods, actions. I now have an object, I'm going to run and do some actions against it. And in REST, they said, look, let's take the standard 4 actions that you would do and make that consistent. And those 4 actions are, you're going to query your data, you're going to go get a record, you're going to save that record, or you're going to delete that record. And again, you're seeing here, and this is what really excites me, is that nothing in this model and nothing in this design really cares about what the back-end database is. You don't see anything here that's SQL specific. This is business objects, business applications. Then, of course, you have other methods. You would extend out your REST service and say, I may have validation, I may have error checking. But as you want to add other methods, you extend out the REST object model. Now, where I get excited when I look at this and look at the years of why we've liked our PIC platform and what our PIC platform does is we fundamentally were doing the same thing. And so I took that same exact demo slide and said, well, this is a PIC representation. Over on the left, even when I code a certain way, it starts looking very much close to object syntax. So here I am storing that same customer record in a PIC record. And this is the core of why SQL tools and ODBC tools did not work well, because you would have to take that record and flatten it out into multiple tables. In the middle, I show you your PIC layout. This is where we differ because we don't have named fields, we have an array. But on the right, you'll notice that the actions that we traditionally do in PIC line up almost exactly with the core actions that you saw on the REST side, which was we do a select to query our database, we do a read to read the whole record in, we do a write to write the whole record out, a delete to delete the whole thing. And then as we want to add logic, and this is where I said earlier the business logic that's in our systems, that we may actually go do some activity. If it's an invoice, we may do fulfillment, we might send out emails and other things. So those are your additional methods. So this is where, you know, a core piece of the presentation is to show that structurally, and this is where we say what is old is new again, and maybe we were a little more mainstream than we thought, is that the model of what we were doing is actually the new popular model that's now propagating through the new development world. And again, all the power and items we liked about the model, which is the ability to add fields on the fly, no super tight typing, all those items is exactly what the new modern developers are looking at and what they're using with new tools. So let's talk about what this ends up looking like when it's actually being used. And what you see here is a classic of those 4 REST services running, and it's your 4 actions, what we call CRUD, create, read, update, delete. And I'm demonstrating it here with a standard web API tool that everybody on the developer side uses called Postman, and it's calling right into a PIC REST service that's running directly off jBASE. There's no IS involved, no .NET, no PHP. It's directly from the client right into the PIC system. And if you look through, I have all 4 actions. On the left one, you can see we've done a query, and it should come back with a list of records. And again, if you look at the file, this is just an EDI file format. In PIC, if you can write a PIC program that can output that, or write a PIC program that can read that, then you are doing REST. And then as we go through the other 3 boxes, you see the other 3 database actions. You can see right in the URL bar, they just put a slash and the primary key, and so now your pick program should return back just that particular record. If they change the web actions to delete, then the pick side deletes the record, and on the final one, it was doing a post and updating, which means it would have been passed in JSON, and the pick program would have gone off and updated our record. And what I would like to say is that, most of us have probably done EDI work, and in the reality, this is fundamentally what this is EDI work, but it's real time. Now, the exciting piece in all this, when I talked about the NoSQL movement, and this is really where we talk about how it helps and relates to pick, is as developers, we're learning that they're doing much more of their development in objects. And if I was to take those above slides and say, if it was a SQL-based system, they were now developing in exactly the same manner. They're going to build objects, and they're going to post objects to a REST service. But in their world, they would have then taken a .NET environment, take that JSON object, and had to flatten it out to SQL tables and query those SQL tables to put it back into an object to hand back. And so as UI developers are over here working on an application, they're thinking in object, or I like to say document methods, because that's how business works. They started getting frustrated with why they had to go over and do a bunch of work or wait for a SQL DBA to take those objects and flatten them out. And every time they would modify and add a new field, they would have to wait for the SQL DBA to turn around and add those new fields, rebuild the databases, and move forward. So what happened is they started asking, why can't we just save the objects directly? Why can't we just work in an object method? Why can't I have a database that can just save the object directly? And that's where you saw the introduction of what's called a document database, the NoSQL document database. And the most popular one out there is probably MongoDB. There's also Cassandra. But these are very popular systems that can scale really big. They implement much of the same concept as Pick, because remember in Pick we build a complex record and we save it all in the same methods. No schema, none of the items that that like SQL would have. They started using these tools and learning that the model, which again is pretty much a reintroduction of the Pick model, is actually a pretty flexible model. And the great thing for us is that the tools that are being built for this are open and work with Pick. Pick has this lines up directly with what Pick is doing. So we can jump into this area. We're able to describe what we are. We're able to go and find developers and say this is the type of system we are, and these are the type of tools we would use. So what the big item now is if we go in and we start building up REST services within our system, our next step is to build our UI. And the real exciting thing, and this was driven not just to us, this was driven into the .NET and those type of applications. And as Paul said, as client server came out, they didn't, even in those environments, they did not always properly separate their logic. But this new model is most definitely requiring you to split your business logic from your UI. And what's wonderful is that once you build this out and you have a level of REST services on your system, you can now go out there and use any modern UI development tool to build a new UI talking into a Pick system, because these tools are just expecting a REST service. And again, this is a very important piece. So now, instead of having to use some proprietary, be it Accuterm GUI or DesignBase or anything like that, you're able to go out there and get normal UI developers who can go off and use something like Angular, which on the left, Apereo is a web-based Angular app builder that will, through wizards and drag and drop, build most of the application for you. And you can see right down through the list, while it still supports SQL and SOAP services, Really the one we're going for is existing REST services. You tie right into there, you can call into your PIC platform. On the right side is Visual Studio. This is Microsoft's product. They saw the change in the market, and as Angular and these other systems were taking off, and you were actually seeing that Microsoft was starting to get used less and less, Microsoft did realize they had a wonderful environment, and as long as they were to shift in and put this technology in there, that their tool would still be very usable. So they, right here, is where they call it Web APIs, but it's the same thing. You click here, and it can now call into your PIC platform and get data back and forth. And again, once the services are there, no one's going to know that that is a PIC system versus a SQL system versus a Mongo system on the back end. Now, how hard is this? I threw in a couple slides here because I've been asked is, how hard is this? Well, this is an example of the product that Paul was talking about that we offer, where this can be available directly in the PIC platform. And again, a lot of what I'm talking about here is options. So you can still go off and use .NET or use Java, call into your PIC platform to get your data, and then expose at a REST level right there and use their REST tools. That's an option. Another option you have here is you can actually write it directly in PIC. And this is not really a full RESTful service, but it's really more of a hello world. But it shows the coding just done right there in PIC Basic with the libraries that our product offers out. So you can sit in there and write your code. And if you were to actually ever write these type of things in PHP or Ruby, you're going to see very similar functions and commands, because there's about 10 things you do on the web, and you can see it all right here. You can access your headers, set content type, get the body. And a big piece we added in here was a object library. So if you're on a PIC platform that doesn't offer objects, we have an object library that helps you consume and build up your objects. And all you would do for a REST service now is extend a program like this out to say, the person asked for a record, I need to go get the PIC record and build the object. If they're asking to update it, we do it the other way around. Again, this is classic coding. I see some solutions attempt to do all this for you through wizards or automatic mapping, but as we know with most PIC systems, that's tough to do. You're almost doing like what ODBC is. So our solution was more like the direction of Node, or in those environments where we give you the tools, we give you access to everything within the REST and the web stack, and then you can build out your services and functions as you need. This is again back to the classic Postman app. You can see right here where I went in and built the objects that it was expecting as variables coming in, and in the bottom you can see the response from the PIC system. So the real important thing here, and where I feel the whole world has changed now, is that the new world is open, and you get to use the tools at whatever area within the application that are best. You don't have to say, hey, because I want a web application, I have to move off my PIC system to get access to web technology. That's not the way the new world is working. The new idea is for all these systems to communicate with each other with a common structure of REST, and therefore you can use whatever tool is best for any place. So if you look at the new list, down the left side you see your development tools, and while Visual Studio is still a great tool, you can see that Microsoft's come out with something called Visual Studio Code, which is basically Visual Studio Lite. It's now available on Macintoshes, for example. But very popular in that space is things like Vim or Sublime or Notepad++, or our venerable Accuterm for doing your actual coding. On the database side, again, agnostic, whatever database you wish to use, including our MultiValue platform. So once again, SQL's still in there, wonderful tool for what it does, but within the NoSQL movement of document databases, that's where Mongo sits, and that's where our MultiValue platforms sit. The language, C#, excellent language. Java is still out there. Python is, I think, one of the most popular right now, but now you have Node.js coming up. All these languages can read REST and produce REST. And PIC Basic. PIC Basic is sitting right there as an option, as I just showed in the prior page. And again, that was tying back to your senior developers and saying they could be involved in assisting with exposing out those parts of the system because they understand it right now. The core of all this is, again, the web services. Open, common structures for talking back and forth between these systems. It's using HTTPS, normal web protocol. There's nothing proprietary there. You're able to buy third-party tools to do monitoring, add security, do load balancing. JSON is our data format, so we all have a common way we describe our data and or variables as we pass things back and forth. And REST is just the consistency of standards, because what I like to throw out here is to be honest, most PIC guys, if they were doing anything, were having to build their own web APIs into PIC over the years that were actually fundamentally what REST is, except for REST is, hey, we've all agreed on how we're going to do it. And what does that leave you with? Now you get the choice of UI tools to build your interfaces. You can still use Visual Studio and their tools. You have Xamarin, which is their mobile platform that Microsoft just recently purchased. You have React components, which comes from Facebook. You have Angular, which comes from Google. jQuery is an open source suite. There's hundreds of additional software packages out there. And as this environment has been maturing, you're starting to see some much easier, almost wizard tools. And again, everything in here is it's not some PIC specific thing. As I heard Paul say, we're now using normal industry standard tools that everybody else is using here because we're exposing our stuff via REST. And then as we talk about integration, the real power of REST is those REST services are not just there for UIs, but they can also be used for system-to-system integration. Therefore, if you are an ERP shop and you've built invoice objects for both putting invoices in and out of your system for posting against inventory, well, somebody else who comes in and wants to do automatic, hey, I want to use EDI, they can call directly into the system and use the same exact REST services. So let's talk about a roadmap. I like to, with my background and what I was doing with my shop, is I had a series of steps I was doing. Number one, utilize your senior developers right now to start learning how to build out REST services and get those systems mapped out. And tied with that is the most important piece, which is they've got to decouple your business logic from screens and make them standalone subroutines. There's no silver bullet to that. A lot of our PIC systems, and not even PIC systems, but other systems, have these tied together. You have to pull them apart. Once you do that, you can start exposing your business logic behind REST APIs. An important piece in this people ask me about is that there is a rethinking on how you lock stuff. Web stuff usually wants to be more pessimistic, so you need to start thinking through how you're doing that, and there's good white papers, and we're able to help you in those areas. Once you have that ready to go, you will actually find that you basically have coding templates on how you build your REST services. And I found that now when I bring in my newer developers, they sit there and work off those templates, and they can actually start writing the PIC side code. PIC is in BASIC. It's not a difficult language to code in. And what I actually found that most newer developers did not like about our PIC code was we had big UIs written in them. And they would look at them and go, well, I haven't had to write a UI in 15, 20 years. I'm used to a web technology or web form technology. So I never had to do that. And so that's the part of the code they hate, but I found that once I had these smaller data-specific PIC code, that they were fine. And if you get into certain versions of PIC like jBASE and OpenQM, which actually offer objects and start offering some of the more modern commands and classes that they're used to, they even get more comfortable. And then start looking at these new UI tools. There are a lot out there. You can go through tutorials and webinars and see how they work and see which ones at the complexity level that you wish to be at work for you. You can work with an Angular or a Xamarin, which are a little bit more complicated but very powerful, versus going with an App Studio, which looks almost like Visual Basic from the old days, or Access. So in summary, I like to hit out a few big points here, which is number one, we've been able to identify what PIC is. And it's very important. We're a NoSQL document database, one of the most exciting new trends out there, which means we can utilize the tools and talk about what we are in reference to document databases. You can look at Mongo and see this is how a Mongo person would develop a database or a solution the same way we would, which is different than a SQL people. Most PIC code I will actually easily refactor into NoSQL type access tools. As I explained earlier, our structures were pretty similar with the CRUD concepts. Interesting thing as we talk about these NoSQL tools is that PIC is still ACID compliant, meaning we are certified for business applications. A lot of these newer Mongos and Cassandras were a little bit more social website design, and they are building ACID compliance into the applications, but within that space, we're already there. PIC has always been an ACID compliant platform, meaning that we're guaranteed when you write something to disk, it is immediately to disk. And then to look at the new application trends and keep these in mind, because I kind of tease that you don't want to be, moving to a big, huge DOS application just as Windows was taking off, and that's the same thing happening now. You may not want to jump into a big, thick Windows application when all the UIs are getting rewritten right now for Web 2.0. Also keep in mind what NoSQL is. Everybody's rewriting UIs right now because the idea is mobile first. Start to modify your development methodology. Look at how the new developers are working with agile methodology and new version control. Microservices is really kind of the term of what all this ends up being. We build services on top of our platforms, and they just get used by the end developers. And then getting into the big thing of machine learning and big data. There's lots of ways for us to push our data into these systems where they do the reporting.
Thank you, Patrick, for that insightful session. I think everyone will agree that what Patrick has presented does lay the foundations for what is available for all of us in helping to modernise our applications, and hopefully without a significant, or the advantage being is we can modernise without having to rewrite our application. We can all take advantage of the business rules and IP that we have input into our application over the last number of decades. So in closing, I would like to thank everyone for attending this webinar. I hope you have found it insightful, and I hope it does give you the enthusiasm to start looking at these new technologies where you will be looking to modernise your applications. Please don't forget, everyone that attends the webinars is automatically included into a draw for the Zumapalooza technology event later this year in October over in Las Vegas. The prize will contain free airfares and accommodation and entry to the Zumapalooza event, which is a 4-day event held in Las Vegas in the M Resort. Uniware went last year. It is an exceptionally good event, and the speakers and topics they discuss are very similar, but a bit more in depth of what Patrick has just gone through, so they are extremely beneficial if you are able to attend it. Please also keep an eye out for our upcoming webinars, the next one being Python. It is a more technical webinar, so we'll be showing you some real examples, some real coding on how to take advantage of Python and utilising your back-end software. So please keep an eye out for that, as well as the ones subsequent to that, which will be a Microsoft integration and the new functionality provided with AccuTerm in its upcoming release. Again, thank you all for attending, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the day. Anyone wants to make contact with us, please feel free to give us a call on the 1800 number or email us at the webinars@uniware.com.au email address. Again, thanks for attending and enjoy the rest of your day.